what we're actually looking at is more, it's the archetypal structure of the story as opposed to the belief or value that culture imposes upon the story. I don't know if that makes sense. So if I just use the example of, say, the crucifixion. So the classic crucifixion of Jesus. Now, that's such an influential story in Western civilization. And we've got this bizarre and absurd thing, which is, in modern day Christianity, we must take the Bible as the word of God and as an accurate historical record. And it's as though that Christians have always thought that this was a accurate historical record and you must believe it word for word. But that's very recent. That's not been around that long. I mean, that was some crazy American guys who, the evangelists way back in the 1800s, they're the guys who started that movement. People didn't take this literally before then, and there's no reason why Christians should take it literally as a story. But it's the structure of the story. So the crucifixion is the best possible person. Basically, he is God incarnate in the flesh. So it's the best possible person experiencing the worst possible thing that was imaginable at the time. And so that takes on a very archetypal nature of basically only the good die young, it's really bad shit happens to really good people, and so on and so on. And then there's all of the micro details within the story. It's got betrayal in there. It's got cowardice in there as people flee and then deny that they know him. There's lots of details in there that resonate very powerfully for people. And it's all managed to be compiled into a coherent story. And that is central to Western civilization. It's central. A lot of the teachings from the book are also from a legal system and all sorts of stuff. So the trick would be to find what are the archetypes that have shaped your culture, your society, that resonate so powerfully with your people, as opposed to the ones that resonate with our people. Now, when I say your people, our people, of course, then as societies get bigger, they fragment. So now we have a bizarre thing here in the UK between two branches of Christianity, Protestants and Catholic, to the point that hideous acts of violence have been perpetrated by both sides upon each other over long, long periods of time. And they both have the same book. They both pretty much do exactly the same things, but there's a few little tweaks of ideological difference that are utterly insignificant within the actual religion. And yet people will have us and them. And so now within the Christian domain, you have two different branches of the culture, and they branch off. But they can't see that we are this way because of this ideology within our teachings. So now what we have is an archetype that's moving through the people. They don't even know it. Most of them have never even been to church, and most of them have never even read the fucking book. They've never even studied the subject. They just know it's us and them. I don't know if I'm explaining that. So essentially what you're looking for are what are the archetypes that help explain everyday phenomena that everyone is caught up in and doing that forms the culture, but they don't realize they're doing it.
Right. What makes it harder for me, for us to do this stuff is, for example, Jesus, or Yeshu in Hebrew, Jesus has his own story. In Hebrew, the story of Jesus not really existed, right? Because it's only New Testament stuff.
Yeah.
So, and on. So in Judaism, we don't have Jesus, basically. And if talked about Jesus, it's like, not forbidden, but, outside of our realms. So, but basically I understand what you're saying is just work to find the stories that match the same archetypes, because these are stories. Now, basically, the same stories until the New Testament, we both have the same stories, right? Abraham and his sacrifice and everything.
But those aren't the ones that have shaped, say, British culture. It's very much the New Testament, because you have to look at how are these things communicated to the culture. And if we look at, say, what happens in schools, so as a small child, we sung hymns, we sung songs that are based around the New Testament. We say prayers that are based around the teachings of the New Testament. We do little plays in the, in assembly or in front of the schools or at the,
That's in school
festival times. Yeah, so at school we are living, embodying, and reenacting a lot of those aspects of the Christian teachings.
Right.
And so we are then shaped with that. And there's lots of movies as well. From my childhood, there were a lot of Bible movies and stuff. And you tend to have two types of presentation of it. You have that ancient reality, and so you get the epic movies of Moses and stuff like that. And they take on a fantastical realm. They're not a truth. They're an epic film to watch. And then you get the stuff that is the Christian, and that's being sold to us as truth. And even if people don't believe in it...
As history.
Right, exactly. But even if people don't believe in it, they then are still shaped by that because it is in the language. And that's the most important part. It infiltrates into the language. And then people repeating it even though they don't realize they're repeating it.
Right. Basically, in Israel, the rigid Orthodox religious people, some of them have schools where all they do is chanting and reading from the books. Okay? And in regular schools, we have the Bible. We read the stories, trying to interpret stuff, and like regular people, not as a history book, but as interpret a story. So there's that and that, but still, because I'm Jewish, I'm supposed to believe that these stories were real.
Yes.
See, so also differentiate the historical view or the just a story view. That's really hard in Hebrew, in Israel. Anything else you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I think for me that one of the things is the issue of belief. And that what the problem is, the moment you start debating or discussing anything to do with religion, it always gets reduced down to belief. And I find that a massive hindrance to basically any of the teachings or understandings of what's communicated within those stories. I see a lot of these things as little more than educational stories and archetypes, but most importantly, they're metaphorical. And the belief is unnecessary. The biggest challenge is the moment, if I start talking about these things in any capacity, people will often go, well, Austin, you don't believe in that stuff, do you? And at that moment, everything is lost. There is no hope in communicating anything of any value with that individual because everything just gets reduced down to belief in that stuff. And whatever they think that stuff actually constitutes, they're down measuring whether I believe in it or not to how they will then respond. And belief is irrelevant.
You talk about the non-religious people?
Both. Because either people are saying, well, you're one of us because you're a believer,
right?
Or you're not one of us because you're a believer, or you're not one of us because you're not a believer, and so on. And it just becomes this absurd thing, which is, what's your ideology? Does your ideology, is it the correct one? Are you one of us or are you one of them? And if you're not one of us, then I can't be positively kind or nice to you anymore because you have the wrong ideology. And of course, for me, the belief thing is where it all gets so messed up for everybody because it always comes down to you must have faith. And when we look at most of the believers, especially these guys on YouTube, the evangelicals, the nut jobs, the flat earthers, and all these kind of people, it all comes down to what they believe. And all of them tend to miss, actually, the deeper teachings of it. For example, they don't know the mathematical formulas within the archetypes. They don't understand the translation issues and actually what some of the original wordings really were and how that changes the sentence structure and how the metaphor is constructed. They can't look beyond belief because for them, belief is all about self-validation. And are my beliefs correct? Am I approved of? And do I approve of you and what you believe? It's the maddest thing. The moment people get into ideology, it's all lost.
Right. Okay. Well, I wrote them not in order, the questions. So I'll just ask one by one. Now, there's basically, these questions came out of watching your tarot series. Okay? But I think everything I'll ask will constitute of the Qabalah, the magic, metaphors of movement itself as a method. Okay? Because everything is packed in the same archetypical thing, whatever. So there's the Tower card, which you say is the basis of level 3.
Yes. Well, it's not the basis of it. Level 3 is essentially an exposition of the symbolism of the Tower card and what the Tower card means.
Okay. Okay.
And that wasn't done. That wasn't done by design. It was when I had designed the workshop, and then the first time I taught it, I thought, "Hang about! I've just realised something here. That all I have done is explain really that path on the Tree of Life of the Tower."
So, the Tower card, the Tower. Now you explained it. I heard everything you explained there, and the one thing, because I'm learning also the metaphors of movement stuff, the Tower is a container.
It is.
So how does the container stuff that you teach in metaphors of movements go into this card? Because I don't think I heard you talking about a container, the Tower as a container.
It is. Now, on the level 3, I don't really talk about that so much. It's not so much about the Tower as container. That's not really what I'm teaching. What I'm teaching is how to destroy
but it is a container.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
So essentially, what we're doing in level 3 is we are bringing destruction to the stage. And for those listening, what the hell is he talking about? So what we're essentially doing is...
Me too.
Okay, we're looking at performance performance metaphor, which is I'm on a stage, I'm under a spotlight, I'm putting on a show, putting on a performance. Now, for an awful lot of people, they're trapped by the performance they've constructed for themselves. And this is most people, a lot of people, are playing a role. And I mean, I did this for years myself. I think it's a very common experience. Most of us grow out of it eventually. But essentially, it's the false ego. Just look at the NLPers. I mean, look at the story they live out of themselves, the story they play of themselves on their social media and stuff like that. They're the all-encompassing great hero. They have the great wisdom, but they're experts on fucking everything. And most of the time, when you meet them in real life, they're neurotic and they're anxious and they're not very good in maintaining relationships and so forth. But that's not the story they're running. They're running a story of being a legend in their own imagination. And so a lot of people construct a role and they start to take on affectations. They take on the language of the group they're learning from, and they're mimicking and they're copying. And they take on a persona. Obviously, a classic Jungian persona versus sort of the true core identity. This is what the Tower is about. It's about the destruction of the false self. It's the destruction of the persona. Now, in metaphors of movement, what we know is the persona is represented by stage metaphors. And the stage metaphor has an incredibly precise number of necessary ingredients, and that's what we cover, in order for it to constitute a stage. Because the landscape may not, that the person in which they find themselves under this spotlight, it might not look like a stage. It might not be a theater, it might not be a cinema, it might not be a performance stage. But as long as all of the necessary ingredients are present, you know it's going to be a stage. Because sometimes we are able to lie about the lie. This is meta-lying. So people can fool themselves that their persona is the truth. And then they fool themselves about fooling themselves that they're not really fooling themselves. So no, I'm not putting on a show. I'm not putting on a performance. This is reality. But actually, when you investigate their metaphorical landscape, they are describing to you in perfect detail a stage because of the construct of a stage, even though it doesn't look like a stage, if that makes sense.
So they believe the lie.
They believe the lie. And they have no insight into it. And so
Right.
what this work enables us to do is to shine the light of truth upon what the person is totally unaware of. And some people, it is amazing what happens when we get to the punchline on the end of day 2 on level 3, where we do the reveal. And because people don't know, they're led through these stages to the last point of day 2. It is phenomenal, some of the reactions I have seen people give in terms of what happens to them, in terms of their experience. It blows some people's minds, because the whole
I saw some people crying. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not always crying. It's not tears of misery either. A lot of it's tears of joy, or that, oh my God, I've just realized I've been lying to myself the last goddamn 30 years. Right. And then we end the course. Bye. Now you can get out and live an authentic life. You can stop pretending to yourself now. So I was just trying to find.
There's no fame in it, you know.
There's no what in it?
There's no fame. There's no money in real life.
Yeah. It's all just...
It's supposed to be a performance.
And unfortunately, I mean, because a lot of people who come to the trainings, they're coming from personal development world, the NLP world, all that personal development, be the best you can be and all that kind of stuff. A lot of them are caught up in the world of being better and having to pretend to be someone else. And a lot of that is driven on how many likes you get, how famous you are. Are you the top of your game? There's so much encouragement, basically, to be a moron of high status. And everyone seems to be chasing
be better is not being yourself. It's the next, how do you call it? The next stage of you being better.
Well, possibly. But now we've got to look at the different models that exist in terms of philosophy. Because for some people, they're constructing the next stage. And literally, that's why we do stages, because it's another stage. So it's another performance. It's just that it's possibly a better performance than the one they had before, but it's still a miserable performance. So some people, they're always progressing, they're always developing, they're always going on. But not everyone's doing that as a personal development. There's an inbuilt metaphorical presupposition into personal development. You develop a building, you develop a building site, you develop a thing to be more than it is. And that's an expansion, it's a development. That's not the same as personal discovery. And that's not the same as the personal archaeological dig of unearthing your true core nature. A lot of people are actually masking over the top. They're hiding their true self and developing over the top of it. Here's a classic, an absolute classic archetype from horror movies. You've got the native burial site that some developer put some houses on. And now you have the perfect formula for a horror story. So essentially you cover over what's truly there, and the spirits rebel. There's been a lot, I mean, what was that movie? Poltergeist was the first one to do that. But there's been so many variations on a theme where the dead arise and go, hang about, you guys, you got to stop this. So it's a classic thing. So I think an awful lot of people, the personal development, they're just learning a new fakery. They're learning a new persona, and they find a new bunch of people who endorse that. And it's not just in personal development. I saw it in the business world as well, the business networking groups and the personal success, financial freedom. They are even worse. I mean, dear God, that really is one great big thing of flim-flam and charlatanism, of fakery of identity. The stuff people say about themselves and the untruths people tell is quite extraordinary.
So it should be the other way around. First of all, self-discovery, and then from that, do the personal development from the real thing.
It could be, but that's what makes the money. You see, the money is in selling people the next level. Scientology did fantastically with this. I mean, at least they got the coherent system. For all the crap that people say about Scientology and all the stuff that's, alleged, the reality is at least they've got a coherent system and they have expertise in what they do. The rest of it is just really, what buzzwords can we say? What makes a good headline? And how do we get people on this bloody workshop with an upsell? That's the main thing. and give them a certificate and give them a grandiose title.
That's business.
Right. So now it's no longer, well, I've gone and learned some skills. I am a master practitioner. I am a trainer. I am a master trainer. I am internationally accredited. I. So actually, they're still the same crappy person. They've just got some grandiose titles.
Yeah.
In Qabalah, when we look at the fool's journey as a way of basically the imposition of tarot onto the Kabbalistic tree, essentially you've got the magician or the magus over here, and then you've got the fool over here, and they're essentially the same person, except one has been educated through life experience and the other one hasn't.
Yeah, I remember, you know, watching this. I'm still trying to comprehend everything.
And so we are the innocent babe in the egg who has, you know, that perfect beatific consciousness that is completely uncorrupted by the human experience at one end of the spectrum. And then we get born into this corrupted world. We go through it and think, hang about, this is bloody dangerous, and there's nasty things out there trying to hurt us. And then we try to return to that beatific consciousness. And on the journey along the way, we try and gather wisdom. And then, so the magus is the guy who's got those things all in balance.
Right.
But in personal development, it's not about that. It's about what everyone thinks of you.
Yeah, man.
So I want to rant.
Lots of layers there.
But basically, the personal development as a model is, in my world, utterly, utterly bogus. It is built around a marketing model. It's not built around perfecting the human experience. And there is the primary difference. It's built around status and self-importance and self-delusion. But if it were actually around the truth, it wouldn't make any money at all.
Right. That's what I said a few minutes ago.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's the, how do you say, presupposition of NLP. You talked about NLPers before. There's the presupposition of there is no failure. There's only...
yeah.
Basically, yesterday I watched a documentary about eating disorders people in rehab, and they went in with cameras and, you know, watched everything what's going on. So one of them said, "I'm a failure." Right now, she's with how do you call it when they feed them through the nose on diets in Hebrew, I don't know. And she said, "I'm a failure." Now, leave the identity thing aside. To say it's not a failure is just, you know, to a person like that with no resources at all. Now that's...
No, I've seen lots of first-hand examples of this where therapists where people who have gone on some training weekends think they are therapists, and they actually will say these things. I mean, it is extraordinary what they'll do. So two of the things that are commonly attributed as presuppositions of NLP, actually they're not. They are a list of presuppositions that were then presented by other people as being presuppositions of NLP. These are derivative, I would say, rather than informative of. If that makes sense. So these don't drive the NLP process. These have been derived by people from the NLP processes. So they'll say there's no such thing as failure. There's only feedback, and that every person has all the resources within them. I think that the thing about everyone having all the resources within them was written in one of the early Bandler and Grinder books, but somebody may be able to correct me on that. Now, there's nothing unreasonable with that, because people do have resources within them. They just don't necessarily have access to it, or that resource isn't available for whatever reason at that moment in time. Because if a person doesn't have a resource to do something, then they can't do that thing. And it suggests there's something wrong with them. And of course, the other presupposition is that people work perfectly. So a schizophrenic is schizophrenic perfectly. I certainly know when I was depressed back in my 20s, I was brilliantly depressed. I did it magnificently well. But so we can frame it. We can frame it that this is not a failure. It's something you're doing well. So I'm doing depression really well. That didn't help me. And in fact, when anyone ever said that to me, or they would try and reframe the meaning to mean something else, all I knew was I was talking to an idiot who did not understand the human experience. And so
that's what they meant. You do the depression very well.
Yeah. And I did. I could teach depression. No, I've got to share something with you. I won't name the individual trainer.
That's a totally different way of thinking that I had. I mean, usually when I'm in depression, that is because I failed in something.
Right.
It's not that I do that really good. It's I failed with something, and depression is supposed to be the feedback about that.
Yeah. Or you failed it perfectly well as intended, and now you get to luxuriate in the depression as a way of justifying that you failed and that you are actually better than this. And so there's lots of ways we can frame this. Now the problem is now I'm no longer the depressive. I can see the truth of those things. I can see it in my own personal experience looking back. Yeah, I totally agree. All of those presuppositions can be applied 100% to 20-something-year-old Andy. I can't deny any of it, as much as I'd like to. But what I do know is at the time, none of that would have been helpful to me. None of it was helpful to me. Because those things were communicated to me by fucking morons who didn't know what else to do. So they have a recourse to these glib and superficial statements to try and feel and present this persona that says they know what they're doing. And they didn't fucking know what they were doing. None of them did. Very few of them actually do. But they know how to speak the language. They know how to repeat the religious incantations of the secret order they're part of. Just like I learned the Christian stuff, you learned the Jewish stuff. Well, they've learned the NLP stuff, and they know the prayers. They know their saints. They've got the biblical quotes that they can throw out glibly as a way of being superior to another person.
Right, and they are on stage.
Yeah. I've just got to say, there was something I was going to just go into. I won't name the NLP trainer concerned. He's very, very good. I won't fault the guy as a trainer. I was assisting, and I was at the back of the room with a number of the other assistants, and he was doing the basically how panic attacks work, and what is the structure of a panic attack. Now, unfortunately, he's a very, very good hypnotist as well, and he had slipped into a hypnotic drone with his explanations of the structure of a panic attack. He's going through the NLP strategies and stuff like that. And I nudged the assistant who sat next to me, and I said, in a minute, somebody is going to have a panic attack. Because he's actually teaching people through the process. And some people and sure enough, it was magnificent. We saw this guy get up from the middle of the room and start to run. He didn't get very far. He tripped over somebody else, collapsed on the floor, and I thought he was having a convulsion, a full-blown epileptic seizure. He wasn't. He was just hyperventilating in a full-blown panic attack. And then there was a doctor in the room as well, and we took the guy out and then calmed him down. But it was perfect, right at the punctuation point that the trainer offered the end stage of the panic attack when the person freaks out. This guy, right on cue, did it. Magnificent. So now what we can say is that, did he have a panic attack? Was that a failed teaching? Or was it a perfect demonstration of installation of strategy? It's just not a strategy that people would necessarily find useful. However, now I can reframe that to say, that was a very useful installation because everyone's had a demonstration of how people learn to do panic attacks. It's not necessarily a condition. And then we can reframe it again and reframe it again in this endless recourse of reframing. But that fucker probably is still having panic attacks to this day and is too embarrassed to tell anyone because he paid £3,500 to go on a training course that gave him panic attacks. And so he can't ever say that. And also everyone's too scared to speak out.
Yeah. Okay, something about the tarot. Is there any reasoning in the order you put the subjects there on the tarot, the video?
None at all. Absolutely none at all. Literally, the order I put them in was the order that I just was interested in and what would be the next one to look at. So there's no significance to the order at all on the program.
So there's no significance to reorder them.
You can order it however you like. The way I've taught it.
Why I ask this? For example, you talk about the alchemical elements, salt and the others, throughout the cards, but only in the Wheel of Fortune. Wheel of Fortune, you give an explanation.
Yeah.
So when I hear the salt, the alchemical stuff throughout the other videos before the fortune, it didn't make not only sense. It's just why is it there? And then you explain it. So in that card, so it's not that now I get the about those. It's just make it more confusing.
Here's the problem. So if I'll just pull out the Wheel of Fortune card and just hold it up so people can see.
It's a lot of material. I'm doing this for years now. For years I'm looking at your stuff, and I'm still not even at the start of comprehending.
Right, the information density is horrendous. So if I was just to go into an explanation of this particular card, we could just say it's rota, so it's ROTA, and it's the revolving wheel of changing fortune, blah, blah, blah. Now, that's all very well. What does that card mean? That's what it means. And that's the problem with tarot, is everyone just goes, what does that card mean? And then they go, well, do you believe in that stuff then? Do you believe in predictions? Oh, for fuck's sake. Hopeless. However, now, because Crowley goes further, so why that many spokes? Why have we got the Sphinx? Why have we got Hanuman the monkey? Why have we got the crocodile? And what's the relationship between the Egyptian gods and the Hindu gods? And how does that then connect to the three primary things of alchemy and the prima materia? And then how does that then connect to the goddess Fortune? Fuck, there you have a whole
layers by layers.
A whole term of comparative religious studies just built on that symbolism before we can even consider what the rotating wheel means and which way does it rotate and why does it rotate that way. Because then we have to get into the movement of planetary bodies and so forth. And then what are all the lightning flashes at the back and the 6 stars pointing up there and all the rest? What's that all about? There is so much information that is encoded in here that it requires each one of those things to be studied. Unfortunately, the majority of people will just go, what does the card mean? Hopeless.
Well, free associations is the easiest part, because when you free associate with any cards, you remember I asked you about Merlin cards. Free association stuff is about what's our universal knowledge, whatever we call it. Association stuff is is about the archetypical stuff that we all share.
Yes.
So if I free associate stuff, it will always be right.
That's right.
It will always be correct.
I've got to be honest, I find within the New Age magic occult communities and societies, the ones I hate the most, the ones who really make record, it's the intuitives. I just look upon the card and I just intuit its meaning. Oh, for fuck's sake, you're just imagining things and you have no understanding as to what you're looking at, and you're too lazy to look it up. And herein lies the problem, of course, because what I prefer the Crowley's deck and his book, the Book of Thoth. And the problem with the Book of Thoth is you can read one paragraph and there are so many reference points and terminologies that are used within that paragraph. It's like, okay, I have no idea what any of those words mean. So then you're going to go and look it up. And so
that's what happened to me when I listened to your videos one by one. That's exactly what happened.
Because the depth of knowledge required in order to just deal with the superficial is so deep, it requires basically a classical education. I mean, Crowley was lucky because he had received a classical education and was raised by religious nuts. So his knowledge of the archetypal stories was very, very strong. And
what do you mean classical education?
Shakespeare and the great poets and none of the modern bullshit of are you using the right pronouns and are you gender fluid? Which is what today's modern education is all about, political correctness. Whereas in days of old, for sort of those with the wealth, you receive education in the classics, the Greek mythologies, the Roman mythologies, and so forth, for which most people now are utterly unfamiliar.
Right.
So essentially, it's an incredibly information-dense system that is made a lot easier these days because you no longer need several reference libraries to go looking things up. You can use Google. And some of the online resources, just for those listening in, the Ordo Templi Orientis, and one of their team offshoots, they have created 2 unbelievable resources for looking this up. Thelemopedia is one of them, and the other one is Hermetic.com. I mean, Hermetic.com is a phenomenal resource for all of these things as well. So it makes it a lot easier to find the source data. But most people are too lazy to do it. They just want to know, how do I sell the next course and what certificate should I give them? That really is most people's motivation, which is why I closed the membership and I'm so restrictive on who can be a member, because I'm not having people just rip this off. We've had 2 people do it already, and I've had those shut down because they were just quite happy reproducing it.
Next one. Now, I think this one is from Card of Fortune, but I'm not sure, and I'm not sure the question will make sense. But how do we explain consecutive or recurring different failures and consecutive recurring different successes to the same person? I don't remember where you talked about it, but it didn't make sense. Mm-hmm. You said something like, if that's important, they will find the money, right? There's this axiom of personal development and, marketing stuff. But people have all sorts of failures. It's not, if I talk about my failures or successes, I cannot attribute it to something specific. But I had like 2 months where everything went bad. Or 2 years where everything did not work as needed. Or whatever. It was the worst time of my life. Still happening, still not happening. So it's not about the bad luck I have or whatever. It's about what I do, the way I think, the way I move in the world. So I hope this question makes sense in some way. I wrote it like 2 weeks ago.
No, I get it. So here's one of the things that one of the common, just to explain one of the things you said there for people listening in. One of the things that's very common in personal development and in the business communities of the financial freedom, I'm not talking real business, I'm talking this shambolic business of financial freedom and property investment, all the scamming that goes on. Essentially, well, but that's really expensive. That course is really expensive. Well, if it was important to you, you'd find the money. It's just a way of getting people to cough up the cash. And essentially, but you can charge a lot of money to therapists because if people really want the help, they will find the money and they'll value it a lot more. Oh, right. Holy God. The narcissism and the lack of compassion of these fuckwits is just too much.
There's this explanation, real explanation. If your child had something bad and you have to get 50,000 whatever, you will get it, right? So why not for that, so you can make more?
Yeah.
They use this reasoning to market.
Anyone who's on the receiving end of someone talking in those terms, take your thumb and jam it straight in their eye, and you'll make the world a slightly better place. If everyone did that,
basically, it is a bit true. It is a bit true, but the use of it is really...
Right, it's a manipulation. So why do people have failures? Why do people have success? Now, there's so many factors going on. Here is one of the major problems, and it's the issue of survivor bias. So for every 100 business startups that occur, probably 90 of them will fail very, very quickly within the first year or two. And so a number of them will go on to succeed. Most of them will fail, and some will change and evolve and adapt. Now, the ones who succeed will attribute that to their own success, their own skill, their own acumen. And yet we know that's not true, because plenty of highly skilled, highly acumen people fail on a regular basis with business. So there's an issue of the numbers game. If you make enough predictions, some of them will be true. They will turn out to be true. If you throw the dice enough time, you will throw sixes enough, once in a while. That's not because of what you did just before you threw it, because you did that, whatever it was, just before you threw every other dice. It's just that some people succeed and some people don't. Now, sometimes that will have something to do with success, and sometimes it won't. But the survivors often make an attribution. So all of these financial freedom people, most of them are only ever making money by selling financial freedom to other people who want to be financially free. The marketers who are endlessly marketing their marketing skills to other marketers, but they've never sold anything other than marketing. And it's just like the coaches who are expert coaches at coaching other coaches. They never see anyone who doesn't want to be a fucking coach themselves. So you have this endless pyramid of coaches, coaching coaches to coach coaches, and marketers selling to marketers to sell marketing. And round it goes. Now, some of those people will be successful, and that's who everyone wants to be. So some of the successes are pure chance, and some of it is nothing more than opportunity and timing. So some businesses, simply, if they had been a year earlier or maybe a year later, they'd have been a lot more successful. It's just that their timing of launch didn't fit what was happening outside. People do fail, and people fail a lot. But we, as a personal development community, encourage people to feel bad about failing because you haven't really failed. You just didn't succeed perfectly. And therefore, if you come on my course, I can teach you the proven 7-step system. So this is a reframe upon other people's misery to extract cash from them. Buy my course, buy my product, buy my book, worship me, click like on my Facebook posts, because I believe in you, because there is no failure. You can be anything you want to be. No, you fucking can't. You can't be anything you want to be. You can only be what you're going to be, which you may not have the control over that a lot of people like to pretend. So now we can take the Wheel of Fortune, and now you can start to go to another thing. You know the roulette wheel? And you even have the game show Wheel of Fortune. Now, I love those two things for two simple reasons. There's an element of skill involved with both of those. Both the Wheel of Fortune is a game show, because you've got to answer questions and stuff like that. You've got to answer the questions right. But at the same time, the wins and losses are predicted by chance. In the casino with the roulette wheel, the wins and losses are entirely chance. However, you play the odds, because depending on where you put your chips on the, I don't know if you've ever seen a roulette thing where you make your bets, depending on where you place that depends on whether your potential win is so much higher, but of course the probability is so much lower, or you play it safe, but your win can be a lot lower, so you're going to be there a lot longer. So people are playing the odds. So there's a level of skill involved in knowing how much to put in terms of risk-reward ratio. And a lot of the forces are external to individuals. And it's the same in business. So some people fail not because of anything they did whatsoever. It's just chance.
So is there do you have an alternative? Is there any other way to act?
Yes.
I mean, okay, which is?
And herein is now the role of the magician. So those who know me, I know my background prior to therapy, NLP, and hypnosis. My background was in magic and occultism, and I was very much involved in that from a late teenager and then into my 20s. And that's how I then got involved in hypnosis and then into NLP. So within magic, what you're trying to do is to tilt the balance of probability in your favor. So you're trying to work with the concourse of forces, the elemental environmental forces that are shaping everyone's existence. You're trying to work with those in order to live congruently with them, as opposed to riding in opposition to them or throwing the dice and taking a chance. What you're trying to do is understand the concourse of these different forces and predict further down the line where you want to be and what you want to have happen. So you work with naturally occurring forces. Crowley would say any conscious act, any willed act where you are trying to determine an outcome by working with an environmental tool is an act of magic. So if I want to illuminate the room, I press the light switch. That is a magical act because I have willed there to be light. If I want to increase my fitness, I go and deliberately and intentionally exercise. That would be a magical act because I'm working with naturally occurring forces under will.
Right.
My observation of... Sorry,
it's not about creating reality.
No.
It's about working with reality.
And unfortunately, this is where the occult and magic scene gets such a bad reputation, because the same morons that go, what does that card mean? Will then start to think that they can hex and make magic spells to like the international consortium of witches and occultists and magicians to curse Trump. Well, so there was like millions of them all cursing Trump on a regular basis at exactly the same time. Well, how well did that work? I think we can see the evidence that that didn't quite work out. And it tells us quite a lot of stuff about the mindset. So this is one of the problems, is that these things get picked up by people who are intellectually lazy, and they like the persona, they like the fashion. And there's lots of them. I used to meet them constantly. And because I wear these things, and I got the Masonic stuff and all the rest, people go, oh, you're one of us. Oh, ugh, get away from me. Loathe these people with a passion. And in the orders and in the lodges, you don't tend to get those individuals because they when they discover actually there's a lot of work here, you got to, you know. Now, the least magical thing people do is the law of attraction. This is my favorite thing to look at. I'm going to be entirely passive, but I'm just going to attract wealth. I'm going to attract good things to me, and so that encourages people to be passive, but buy the film, buy the books, buy the products, go on another law of attraction course so we can all feel good, which basically means you don't have to study anything, you don't have to do anything, you can be entirely stupid, and we will promise you the universe.
Just
well, that didn't work out for some of those. Like old Death Ray with his sweat lodge managed to kill, 2 or 3 people and cripple a number of other people. He then went to jail. A lot of these people have been bankrupted since. I don't see it working out too well for them. And then you ask them, okay, so what about, if it's all about attraction, what about those people who have been paralyzed by polio? What about AIDS? What about cancer? Did they attract that to themselves? Is that what you're saying? Because they thought the wrong thoughts. I've actually asked people directly, and some people say yes.
That's the reasoning, yeah. Okay, next one. How did you come to the conclusion that Crowley stuff is the closest to what is accurate or true or reasonable or whatever? Okay, there's also, the Torah, right? There's Jung stuff, more stuff. Now, I'm not referring to rituals, right? I'm not referring to rituals, but more to the meanings of symbols and archetypes. So why Crowley's?
I think for no other reason than I had the greatest familiarity, and I really enjoyed his work. I think that's it. I think it's Crowley. It's Crowley, not Crowley. Just for people listening in, I said Crowley for years, and then I joined the Audio Temple Orientist. Right. Hang on, I got it. Is Crowley? Are you sure? Oh God, I got to get that back in my head. I think with Crowley's work, he was a very educated individual. I'm sure he was also probably quite a horrible individual, but he was a very educated man. And I think it was the quality of his writings, the quality of his teachings that made it most easy to understand. And the fact that he presented a practical system. A lot of the, I know you say you're not referencing rituals, but a lot of the ritualistic stuff that's outlining a lot of Crowley's work, it doesn't make any sense. If you don't know what all these words mean and what they're all referring to, you don't have the background to that. A lot of this stuff doesn't make sense. But do them anyway, memorize them and have a total familiarity with them. Then, when you read what those things were and what they're about, you have a point of reference by which to understand it. And that, for me, was the key. So learning something from nothing more than a theoretical perspective is very, very difficult. When you're given a set of experiences, and then those experiences are explained to you, you now have a personal understanding of what you're being told. And so that, for me, was why it was so useful. And I mean, my way in was to Crowley and then into a Kabbalistic order. And that was when I was, 18, 19 years old. And then the studies went from there. and then later on, much more recent years, then with the Ordo Templi Orientis, and then with Freemasonry. So we get a lot more experience with a lot of these practical and utterly ridiculous pantomimes. I mean, let's not try and dress these things up to be anything than they actually are. A bunch of idiots dressed up in costumes doing a ridiculous pantomime, massacring the Hebrew language with mispronunciations. And then the funniest thing is when you hear people trying to sing in ancient Egyptian. Oh my God, it's wonderful to behold. And
you have an online video, whatever, I don't what it's called.
Yeah, I've not got that
rituals.
public at the moment. I will be it's the lesser banishing ritual. I'm going to have when I remake the Qabalah project website, that's on there. I've already got it uploaded, actually, ready to put on there. But yeah, so people can see me being a complete moron, waving my arms around and all the rest of it. But see, the interesting thing about these is they don't work as a spectator sport. To watch a ritualistic performance that's not a ceremonial thing that's being done for, like the changing of the guard, your military parade, those type of rituals, which are theatre, they're performance. They're not designed to educate the people doing it. They're not designed to convey a meaning to anybody. They're for show. These particular rituals are educational processes, and they look absolutely absurd. If you look at one of the leading lights in the OTO, James Wasserman, on YouTube, you'll find the Gnostic Mass. The Gnostic Mass is a central rite of the OTO, and they have done an amazing job in filming the Gnostic Mass all the way through. It's the complete experience.
It's an hour of
and it's
it was weird.
Right now, from a film point of view, they have done a magnificent bit of work. And for anyone who wants to learn and do the Gnostic Mass, this is an invaluable resource. But anyone who has no understanding of what any of that is about or what the fuck this is, they'll watch that and go, "Oh my God, what the hell is going on?"
Yeah.
Because it's seriously disturbing. And yet, actually, when you study the Gnostic Mass and you look on the inside of what that is, it is actually it's an incredible piece of work. But of course, it's incomprehensible to watch it. It's only by participating in doing it does anyone actually get an understanding of it.
Now, I can say that the experience and explanation stuff, and they go together, it's basically what happens in your IMT and Metaphors of Movement courses. That's exactly what happens. Everything is experience.
That's what I try and do, yeah. And I think that is the Lodge principle coming through in how I construct the training courses. I don't like to just lecture and talk about things. And some people, oh dear God, so many trainings are just people talking about stuff. And to their credit, a lot of the developers, the first level developers, you got your Bandler and Grinder, and then your first level, those guys did amazing in shifting paradigms from being cold, boring teaching and shifting it to an experiential learning where it's skill-based, and people do leave with skill sets. And I think that was pretty innovative, to be fair. I don't think there was a lot around back in those days that was comparable. I mean, I did nurse training, and dear God, 3 years of bullshit as far as I was concerned. Seriously, there was no value in those 3 years of education. Most of it was just utter nonsense, and there was no practical skill training of any use that was taught in the classrooms. Nothing. It was a complete waste of time. And I think a lot of vocational trainings are like that as well. They're still relying on PowerPoint.
Some people, it's their, how do you call it? Their comfort zone as a student. It's their comfort zone. That's what they used to. Now, when I give my IMT trainings, I see those people that's their comfort zone. Some of them get angry about, why do I need to experience? Just explain me. And some of them, it was like a revelation for them. Wow, now I understand. So that's exactly the differences. I think that's what needs to be happening in schools.
I would hope so.
It's just with children. So.
We could possibly start drugging children a little less if we actually gave them activity that was meaningful. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now, lots of puns. Okay. Like immersion and solution. So if immersion, so yep. I'm immersing something, which is a solution.
Only if it's salt water. If it's a river and it's fresh water, it's not a solution.
Or anything that's combined within a liquid, right? That's a solution.
Yes.
Now, this specific pun doesn't work in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it works in any other language at all, to be honest. Yeah.
So I managed to understand the experience, but not managed to find words in Hebrew to describe the experience. That's going to take a lot of time, I think.
Here's a weird thing. If you look at the archetypes, there's a lot of aquatic gods. There's a lot of water gods.
Okay.
Gods from the water. There's loads.
Yeah, it took me, you know, that it took me a lot of time to understand that when you explain stuff within the tarot cards, it took me time to understand that you talk about gods and archetypes, you talk about gods to differentiate that this one is from India and this one is from Rome and this from Greek and this one Egypt and some of them are even parallel to each other.
It's amazing. The same archetype taking slightly different expressions within the culture.
What I'm saying, it took me a lot of time to understand that these are different mythologies. First thing, different mythologies, and then to understand that every mythology has the same qualities of gods, different gods. Then it started to make sense.
Yeah,
some stuff started to make sense.
I think of that, just on that one alone, just before we go back to the solutions bit, my favorite one is the Hanuman, the Hindu god Hanuman, and the Roman god Mercury. And then you have Hermes and Thoth if you go into the Greek and Egyptian, and they're all the same god. But the parallels between Hanuman and Mercury are just. I was with my good friend Jim. We went to Delhi for some. We're doing some stuff with a homeless organization, and we were in Delhi end of last year. And where we were staying is opposite the main Hanuman temple in Delhi. And of course, there's a lot of market stalls around there, and it's a hive of activity. It's a fantastic place. And what is amazing is you could be looking at Mercury in all the symbolism, because they've got all the different statues, all the different posters and stuff like that. I've got one on the wall right here, in fact. And of course, what do they have in common? They both fly. That's always quite a good one. Wings on the feet and so forth. And they represent the same stuff. Here's the bit, and this is where some of the trainers who are familiar with Joseph Campbell's work and a little bit with my work, and they try and reproduce these things. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
Where is it? Where is it? Oh, that was Laura's phone. When she's in the shower tomorrow, I'll flush the toilet. Right. So Hanuman and Mercury, they're not the same archetype. And my frustration with a lot of these trainers who have a loose understanding of these things, and because they've seen a YouTube video about Joseph Campbell, they like to talk about archetypes. And they're not the archetype. They are different representations of the same archetype. So Thoth is not an archetype. Hanuman is not an archetype. But they are manifestations of the archetype.
Wait. You were stuck. You have to say this sentence again.
Okay, so Thoth is not the archetype. Hanuman is not the archetype. Mercury is not the archetype. But these are different representations of the archetype.
Which is basically...
Exactly. There you get the difficulty. Now, the moment we get into... Okay, so what is the archetype? Well, it's a level above that. And now we get straight into the ineffable. And the whole thing about in the Bible, especially in the Christian Bible, that God is ineffable. He cannot be understood. Keter is ineffable. If we're looking at the supernals of the Qabalah, it cannot be understood by ordinary consciousness. these are the archetypes. These are the core archetypes, because we can't give it language. The only way we can give it language is by giving it symbolism. And so the gods are the archetypes that we then invent symbolism for. Now, with that in mind, here's the thing about the solution. If you notice, the aquatic gods, the water gods, most, not all, but most of the saltwater gods are male, and most of the freshwater gods are female. This is one of those things that people may want to look up to have a look. There's loads of counterexamples. It's a generalization, but it is an interesting observation. And that should lead you to a lot of understandings around what does that then say about our solutions in a culture and how we perceive solutions to be. Now, it can get really, really strange. So we now take that all the way through to modern day, right? What is the number one problem? And I got this from the guy, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, Rob Gray, somebody Gray. Really good book, actually, I've got to say. I've learned a lot from that one. Where the classic thing is, when women have problems and they talk about it, the guy needs to shut up and listen. But we don't. We go straight into problem-solving mode.
Solution mode.
Yeah, it's because we solve problems. And so and that can lead to all sorts of frustrations between people. Well, you're not listening to me. I am bloody listening to you. I can tell you exactly what you need to do about this. But no, that's not what they want. They want you to listen.
So you don't listen to me. That's, yeah.
Because we're the guys are full of solutions. Now,
well, we are gods of solutions.
The word solve is an alchemical term. So now we can look it into solve. And now if we have... so we
now,
go into
what I'll say about it is what?
So now we go into the classic Eliphas Levi's Baphomet, where on one arm you have solve, on the other arm Coalgula, which is basically to break it down and recombine, which is part of the alchemical process. So solve has a very powerful, is a very thing within hundreds and hundreds of years of operating metaphor of human culture. These days, our operating metaphors tend to be computers and technology. It used to be alchemical terms. And that we had alchemical terms in our language much, much longer than we did technological terms, because that's only since the Industrial Revolution. So we still use a lot of alchemical language in our ways of describing dealing with problems. And you have a lovely, and of course people go, that's your Satan, isn't it? Oh, hopeless. Hopeless.
And now it's a good thing you talk about Qabalah. Now, you say Qabalah, right? You have the C, K, Q. Never mind, you talk a lot about those. Let's put it aside. I just wanted to add something. In Hebrew, you say Qabalah.
Yeah, but that's probably how it's supposed Qabalah. To be said.
Yeah. Now, in Hebrew, Qabalah, of course, it's that. Okay, what's behind you. But it also means receiving a letter, right? Receiving. Yeah. And accepting yeah. Like an apology. These are all is about Qabalah, yeah. About receiving, about accepting. Just so you know.
Yeah, and it basically...
So when you say Qabalah, my head runs through all those stuff.
Yeah.
So that's partially why it's really, well, tiring even.
But the presupposition between Qabalah, however you want to say it, the presupposition behind the Hebrew meanings of the name is that you are a vessel.
Right, receiver. Right.
And it can start to get very, very strange, because now have a little look at the use of the word ark, which it has two primary appearances within the Bible. You have the Ark of the Covenant and you have the Ark of Noah. And what they are both is a vessel. And now look at what the Ark of the Covenant...
words in Hebrew.
Right, but then when we start to look at the archetype of what was the Ark of the Covenant, how was it interpreted archetypally, and what was the Ark of Noah, you end up with some very interesting observations. And basically, the intimation from the term Qabalah is you are a vessel.
For me, because it's in Hebrew, For me, it's like you'll say, well, there is a glass and there is, I don't know, a box. They both can contain something. So they are both receivers, right? Now, Ark of Covenant, how did you say it?
The Ark of the Covenant. But the Ark of the Covenant was the thing that was the mysterious box.
I know what is that.
No, I'm explaining to the listener.
Oh, sorry.
You and I know this, but most people have got no fucking idea at all.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
So it's the mysterious box. It appears in the Indiana Jones movies as well. They did quite a good job, I thought, with that.
When you open it,
if you look at it, you die. Now, there's been a lot of discussion and debate within various people as to what was it, what were they carrying around, and basically it was a nuclear device. But for them, within the context of the story, it's the holiest thing. It is a physicality of God, and that if you open or get too close, you're not one of the high priests, then that's the end of you. You're dead. And I think within that story, actually, there was a point where some people got shriveled up and died, didn't they, from gazing upon it, getting too close to it. And it was carried around with them everywhere they go. It's the Holy of Holies. But so that was something that was divinely inspired. But so was the Ark, because God gave very specific instructions for its dimensions. And of course, for those who are into Natarikon Gematria, then the numerical systems of Qabalah, the dimensions of Noah's Ark reveal a whole bunch of interesting stuff.
Now, in Hebrew, the Ark of Covenant is said as a closet of the covenant.
Yes.
And in Noah's case is basically a box.
Right.
Okay?
So they have different. It's
a big box, looks like a ship, right?
Yes.
They both contain something.
Right.
But different words.
But this is where, for me, the descriptors and the linguistic shifts within the publications have influenced culture. So in the West, we use Ark, and that has been a long-standing use of the term. But don't
one
have
word.
That. Right, we have the same word. Because obviously, when things were translated through Latin and into English, we wrecked the original. That we don't have. It's basically God, Father, and Lord. We don't have Adonai, Elohim, and all the others. And so people don't realize that the God of Moses, his name is I Am. They don't know that because we just replaced that with Lord. But people don't realize the different Hebrew words have different, very, very different meanings and connotations throughout each of the different books of the Bible, because we just generalize them all into the same God.
Right.
As opposed to
I need to always translate back again and again to what's the meaning.
And the funny thing is, if you're in the magical lodges, when you hear people try and pronounce the Moses' God's name, because these God names are used quite a lot, because it's EHEIEH is how would be written in English, and it's hilarious all the different ways that people go through this, and especially if it's being intoned within a ritualistic setting as well. Oh my God, it's just wonderful.
Basically, the right way to say it is EHEIEH.
There you go. See, that's exactly how everyone thinks they say it. Yeah. They don't.
Which
I've
means
never managed it yet.
I will be.
Right.
That's what you use in Hebrew, this word. So, grail is for water, right?
Grail, no one actually has agreed what the Grail is. Often it's interpreted as a cup, and it's
a cup.
But it's interpreted in two types of cup. One is it's the cup that was held up to Jesus' mouth when he was on the cross, and the other one is it's the cup of the Last Supper. But sometimes Grail is interpreted as being something else entirely. There doesn't seem to be a uniform consistency as to what the Grail actually represents. They just know it represents something that's magical, mystical, and everyone's got to find it.
They all are Grail. It doesn't matter what for, but they all agree it's a Grail.
Yeah, but no one knows what a Grail is.
Okay.
That's the point. It's this weird concept that no one really pays too much attention to. They just know it's the Holy Grail. That's all they need to know. They don't know, okay, what does it look like? How would you draw that? And okay, that's what. If it is a cup, then where did it originate? And again, there's no uniform consistency as to what the Grail is. So you have different traditions of Grail. And these are usually sort of the romanticized chivalric orders. So the Knights of, you have lots of, within Freemasonry, for example, and a lot of the spin-offs, something called Martinism, which is a Christian sort of nobility order. They have lots of spin-offs too. And the different traditions have different concepts of Grail, which then leads into different symbolisms of how they then operate.
Okay, so let's go with what you present, which is Crowley's work,
yeah,
right? So there, in tarot, whatever, Grail is water, is for water, is water, right? Represents water.
Kinda.
Why? Kinda.
Mm.
Why disc is for earth, and why swords is for air. Sword is for air. What's going on?
Attribution. At some point, someone just made that shit up, and then it stuck. So in itself, it's not archetypal. In itself, it's not actually an archetype. At some point, people needed an agreement, and I think there's nothing more than that. And then it becomes archetypal because it becomes influential, where enough people agree. You'll find plenty of books from antiquity on magic and things like that, where the attributions are all quite different. It's just that eventually things start to become archetypal because there's a consensus over time as they congeal into, okay, this is the system we use.
So no one really knows why that's the attribution.
I wouldn't say no one knows.
Just like why this path is Gimel and that one is Shin.
Yeah, again, there are reasons for the attributions of the path, but again, not everyone agrees with it. Because for those who are familiar with the Tree of Life, they're not always drawn like this. Not all of them have Malkuth, for example. The general system is you either have Darth appearing and you don't have Malkuth, or you have Malkuth but Darth isn't there. And when Malkuth isn't there, of course, you lose these lower 3 paths. But you still have to have 22 paths, because the Zohar says there's 22. So in which case, you have more paths delineated up here.
Okay.
So there's a shifting around of how these things connect up. Again, this is just general. This has become archetypal, but in much more recent times than people would like to think, simply because Eliphas Levi was the guy, so he was the French magician, who initially started to make these attributions. Then the Golden Dawn came along at the end of the 1800s. They then came up with the system, and then Crowley switched 2 of the cards. And generally now, the Golden Dawn system is the accepted system in the West, and then Crowley's edition is very popular. Crowley's version, where you've got a switch between the attributions to this path here and this path here. And that comes from his book, The Book of the Law, where there's a line that says, and Tzaddi is not the star. And so there's a switching of the paths to be congruent with the book.
So it's not about truth, it's about what's reasonable, or...
I think if you're learning Qabalah and the tarot attributions and all the spin-offs that come from that, it's a case of pick a system that seems to make sense and stick with that. And don't worry too much that other people have different systems. So I use exclusively Crowley's system, and I have never really bothered with the others. And no one is more valid or invalid than any other.
Right.
This is just a system by which to sort out and separate out very, very complex concepts. It doesn't have to be seen as a truth. This is just some shit people made up. That's it.
Actually, it popped a question in my head. You talked about another sphere, which is Dov, right?
About there.
Right. Now, in Hebrew, actually, you say Da'at.
Yep. Which is knowledge,
with T.
Yeah.
Which is not...
Well, it's knowledge. That's how we interpret the word Da'at.
Right.
Or Da'at, it means
Da'at, it's know stuff.
Yes.
Know stuff. Da'at, the vessel that keeps the knowledge, whatever.
Yes.
Is there any... I mean, that's the tree of life, and you have the sphere of that. Is there a connection to the Bible story
yes.
of Genesis?
Yes.
About the tree of life and tree of death.
Yes. So in Genesis, you have the tree of life, the tree of knowledge.
The tree of knowledge, right. The tree of knowledge is the one they picked the apple, took a bite, and then they know stuff. They're aware now.
I misheard you. There's something I came across recently. So now the Kabbalists will study the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis being the primary thing. And so within that, you can interpret all of the stories within the first 5 books through this set of filters. And that largely inspired the construction of the symbolism within this glyph. You also had a number of other books. You had the Sephira Yetzirah and the Zohar, which were 2 early Kabbalistic books. They're not that old. They're not as old, anyway, as old as the Bible, which basically then is what gave a rise to this, where it became a system of these particular mystics. When, okay, we can actually lay out the interpretation of these stories, being far from anything that's a divine truth in terms of a literal interpretation. And we can actually start looking at sentence structure and metaphor structure. And this is the way by which we can understand that. And so that's how it had a number of different influences. And then people made corrections and adjustments and so on.
Yeah, so much material, man.
It's huge. And if you try and read the Zohar, or if you read...
If I thought the metaphors of movements, 4 days basic stuff is... lots of material and lots of layers of understanding, then you came with this Historia stuff and everything.
Yeah,
it just became one big.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. That's why we don't try and cover this stuff in any workshops, because it's just hopeless, because it's too much academic study that's required, and people need to do that background reading on their own. It's much easier and then get together in online groups, whatever, to do study groups.
Now, you referred to that female is about water and life and brings life, and it also about air, right? So I thought about it because of my life experience. One time, a female takes your breath away when you see her, right? It's about air. Second, when she gets pregnant, air is masculine, right? Something like that. The third, when she treats you as her non-relevant, she takes your air away. So air is the thing that breathes life.
Yes, and that goes right back to the first ever example of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Which is the earliest example is documented in Genesis, where God makes Adam out of some dirt, not even soil, out of dirt, and then breathes air into his lungs. So the very life began, within Scripture, life began by God breathing life into Adam's lungs. Basically, a pile of dirt was breathed into and then became alive. And then we talk about taking your last breath at the point of death.
Right. So
which symbolically is great, but actually in practice, that's not how it works at all, of course.
Right. Just what I'm trying to understand is how it's all connected to the woman, to the female. Because she,
well, it gets
for me, my life experience, yes, a woman can control your life, basically, because it's taking your breath.
Every guy gets to the position where they learn that. Yeah. We like to think we are running the show. Guys like to think they're in charge, but only because women let us. Yeah.
That's true.
It's true. It's true.
It's true. You remember,
But here's there's because of the paradoxes within paradoxes, especially within the tree of life, because you have the pillar of severity, which is regarded as sort of masculine, and then the pillar of mercy, which is regarded as feminine. But at the top, of course, you have
female stuff.
Right. Now, a lot of these paradoxes are actually resolved very nicely by Crowley's work. Now, essentially, if you're a bit confused what Crowley's talking about in any given sentence of his writings, he's talking about something sexual. There you go. You just know everything gets reduced down to sex. Because essentially, here's what you have. life is created by God by breathing air into Adam. And as we know, Adam actually means of the earth, as opposed to the first man. The West translated it as Adam was male, but we know that's actually not quite the case when we look at the structure of the original story. God breathed life into that being. But who brings life into the planet of all creatures is the female. So basically, everything gestates within woman in order to bring life. But it is regarded mystically that the male seed, or the spermatozoa, is the life force into which the female incubates. Now, most alchemical symbolism uses that. If you look at the alchemy of the crucible and all the symbolism, when you actually start decoding what those things actually meant, that's all they're talking. Basically, alchemy is a sex manual.
Well, I have a lot of work to do in that area.
Yeah.
Now, if you remember, the reason you said you wanted to do this video is about a question that I started to ask, and well, I'll ask the question.
Can I just propose we take a break?